Hi there, Rebecca Weckerly here. Today I'm going to show you how I made this cute little card using several stamp sets for my favorite things. I'm using the I'm All Yours, You Know Me, and You Are the Best stamp sets. I'm also going to be doing some stenciling, some Copic coloring, and stamp masking to make this card. Now the first thing I did is I took a piece of Neenah Solar White and I cut it to 4 by 5.5, and I die cut the center of it with the largest die from the Inside and Out Stitch Dies by My Favorite Things. The inside of the panel is what we're going to be using for the coloring and stamping, and the outside is going to be the frame. Now I made masks with all of my stamps from the Inkadinkado masking paper. And when I cut out my masks, I always like to cut right on the black line. That way there is no space in between when I stamp my images that are going to go on top of the masks. It won't leave a gap. Now, I went obviously a little off camera here, but it's okay. I'll walk you through it. I wanted my largest mushroom to be the first image, the front image. So I went ahead and stamped that first, and then I stamped two little mushrooms off to the right and one to the left. Now I wanted a little snail to be on top of one of the mushrooms, so I went ahead and stamped him right on top, just lining up, looking through my stamp block to make sure I had him lined up correctly. And I went ahead and stamped him and then applied a mask. Now I did the same thing for my two owls, and I wanted them to look like they were standing on top of the mushroom, so I did take off the largest mushroom's mask, just peeled it back a little bit, and went ahead and stamped the two owls. Now I got a little lazy, and my third mushroom is actually just masked with some washi tape. I didn't stamp out enough of the small mushrooms, so I just went ahead and improvised, and that's okay. Now for the grass, I used the oval grass die or stamp that is in the You Are the Best stamp set. Now since you can bend clear stamps, I just went ahead and shaped it to how I wanted the bottom of this card to be, and it's stamped perfectly. Now, whenever I stencil, I like to tape my paper to the back of the stencil. That way I don't have to worry about that tape getting in the way of any of my stenciling. And then I went ahead and taped it to the bottom of my paper that I'm going to be stenciling on. I went ahead and taped that to my desk. That way it won't be moving around. Now, the first ink color that I used was In the Buff by My Favorite Things, and I'm using the Clarity stencil brush to apply this ink. And man, are they terrific. I could never get a good stenciled image, light stenciled image anyway, until I got these brushes, and they are great. I recommend them highly. But after I used the In the Buff ink by My Favorite Things, I used the Abandoned Coral, which is a distress ink, and Coral Crush ink that is also by My Favorite Things. And I absolutely love when I take the masks off my projects because I'm really thrilled that it actually turned out. It's just great to see a project, come together. Now for my mushroom, I started off using the R02 and the R14. I went around the edges with the R14, anywhere where there would be a shadow and where I wanted to give dimension, and then I blended that out and filled the part of the mushroom in with the R02. Now here's where I goofed a little bit. I brought out my hex chart, which is another must-have for Copic coloring. Like I don't know how I lived without that thing before either. I don't even use my other Copic chart anymore. I always refer to this hex chart, and that is made by Sandy Allneck, and she has that available on her website. I'll place a link for it in my blog. So go ahead and check that out. But it is great. But I ended up picking out a pink, and I shouldn't have done that. It was a no-go. So I just went back over it with the R02, and it blended in okay. And I figured since I couldn't go lighter, I was going to go a little bit darker on this bigger mushroom. So I used R24 and R27 around the edges and blended that out with the R14 and the R02. Now for the mushroom base, I used E50 and E53. I colored in the E53 around the edges and underneath the mushroom part itself, and then just blended that out with the E50. Now, for my little owls, I used E31, E33, E35, and E37. With my Copic coloring lately, I have been starting with my darkest color first, and that works really well. I really have been liking my coloring when I start with the darkest first. But I wanted to remind myself to keep her face light. In my practice coloring for this card, which I do sometimes. Sometimes I just go for it, but I was practicing coloring these little owls. I noticed I kept getting too dark near her face, and I like to keep my critters' faces very light. I just think it just looks really cute that way. So I colored in with my E31 around her face just to remind myself to try and keep that light. I went around the edges with the E35 and blended that in with the E33. Now I added shadow along the side where she's standing next to her little boyfriend owl and underneath her wings and a little bit on top of her head just to add some dimension. Now I did want to create a little peak like in between her eyes like you've seen colored owls have, I'm sure. So I did use my E33 for that and then blended it out with my E31, just still trying to keep her face light, but just add a little bit of detail in as well. Now, I did decide to go with my E37 and add a little bit of a darker edge around my owl. Don't ever be afraid to add a little bit of extra dimension with a marker color that you think might be a little too dark. I'm always happy with my results when I do that. It just adds a little bit more dimension and just really makes the image pop. So go ahead, take the chance. Use a little bit of a darker marker for your the darker parts of your image. That way it just adds like a nice little pop. I'm always happy with it and it looks great. So I went ahead and blended that back out, again working from my darkest to my lightest and just blending the images, the colors as I went, and just making sure that the blend was nice and smooth and still keeping light around her little face. Now I also colored the little feathers on her belly with that E37. Now for her eyes, I wanted to keep them nice and bright, so I just used the E50 marker and just filled them in with that. Now for the boy owl, I wanted him to be a couple shades darker, so I started with my E33 this time as my lightest marker. Used E33, E35, E37, 39, E25, and E29. The E25 and 29 are what I used around the edges to give him that little bit of a darker shading. So I went around wherever there would be any shadow in between his eyes with the darker color, and then blended out from darkest to lightest, just keeping a little bit of a light color towards his head and underneath his little beak there, and just a little bit lighter on his belly. Just working with those markers until I get a nice smooth blend and have him the colors that I'd like for him to be. Now for his little feathers, I did add the E25 and E29. I made them a little bit darker. And then again, just use those darker colors for shadows and for the little feathers that are on his belly. So don't be afraid of those darker colors. You might discover something you actually really like. So I just kept working with those E's until I got them to about the color and the shading that I wanted him to be, and kept the blend nice and smooth. And you might go over it a couple times. I know I obviously obviously did, but it's always worth it in the end when you get an image that you really like. Now for both of their beaks, I use the YR27 and my E08, which are my go-to colors for pretty much anything with a beak. Now for the little snail, I used E31, E33, and E25. I colored the snail's body with the E31 and highlighted, or excuse me, I guess shaded with the E35. Now the little shell on the back, I used the E33, went around the circle with the E25, and then added a few little squiggly lines here and there on the shell and blended that in with my E31. And that just gives a little bit of texture to that shell and a little bit of dimension as well. And I thought he looked really cute. Now for the grass, I used G40, G43, and G46. And in my coloring, I've liked lately to add color to the background, kind of like you're changing the aperture of a camera. You know how to blur the background? I've been trying to mimic that by using like a flicking technique behind my images, where you can tell that there's some depth there, and you can see a little bit of detail in the flicking motion, like blades of grass, but it adds just a nice, gives some depth and also keeps that color going a little bit further into your background. So I used the flicking technique with my markers here to create that background up behind my mushrooms. And then I also blended it down on the card panel until since we're going to see all of this card panel, I wanted the whole bottom of it to be filled with what looks like grass. So I was really happy with the way that turned out. Just use that flicking motion up behind the mushrooms, and it gives a little bit of depth and just a nice addition to our scene. Now I use the VersaFine ink to stamp my sentiment, which says, "I'm Owl, yours," and stamp that on my card panel. Now I used my white gel pen and a black glaze pen. I used the black glaze pen for the center of the boy owl's eyes. It just makes the eyes pop. Now I use the white gel pen to add a few dots on the cheeks of the girl owl and also to fill in those little highlights that are on the mushrooms. Now I use sequins on this card, which is something I don't do too often, but probably should. I do like the way it looks. It's cute. So I used sequins. The brown ones I had in my stash. The white ones are from Pretty Pink Posh. And I used my pickup stick, which I think is by Silhouette. Let's see. Yeah, it's the Pick Me Up stick, which has tacky on the edge on one end, which is nice because it'll help pick up the sequins, and you can place them on your card exactly where you want them. And I used the multi-matte medium to adhere those down. Now for the card, the orange cardstock that you see there is actually Coral Crush, which is from My Favorite Things. And I'm going to be using that frame we die cut earlier as, I'm going to be giving it some dimension using some foam tape. Now I just measured out what I needed to cover the frame, and I cut those pieces of foam tape in half and then added to the frame just for some nice definition and a little bit of dimension as well. And I removed the backing for the sticky tape, and I placed it on the Coral Crush cardstock. And then I used my multi-matte medium to fill the inside of the frame with glue so we can adhere our card panel. And I just stuck it down in there. And I was pretty happy with it. I thought it looked really cute. Now for my card base, I used a piece of Neenah Solar White again, and I believe this is 80 pounds. And I went ahead and folded that and used my bone folder to give it a very nice crease. And I attached that with multi-matte medium as well. And there we go. Now I always shift my card panels around a little bit to make sure I've got glue all the way on the corners so that the card panel is nicely attached to my card. And I had a couple little frayed edges there, so I used a sand eraser just to get them off. And I'm pretty happy with this card. I thought it looked really cute. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch. I'll see you soon.